Welcome back to The Layers We Live. I'm Dr. Loree Johnson, therapist, trainer, reproductive health advocate, and someone who's lived through more than a few layers myself. Around here, I'd like to think that we talk about the real stuff, the ways in which mental health, reproductive health, identity, grief, and healing all get kind of woven into our everyday lives. And because some of those most defining moments that we have, they're the ones that nobody sees, the ones that we don't always have language for. So this is our space to pull back the curtain, get real, and share some of the conversations that matter, the ones that don't always happen out loud. And today's episode touches on a topic that I think is very near and dear to my heart. And it's one that is rarely spoken about in our communities, and that is termination for medical reasons, or TFMR. This is a type of pregnancy loss that is wrapped in heartbreak, often made more painful by the silence, stigma, and misunderstanding. TFMR is not about a lack of love. It's a decision that's often made out of a deep love for our children, for our families, amid impossible circumstances. And many who have walked this path describe it as a kind of hell, facing this devastating news and navigating complex medical systems and political systems, and still walking away with empty arms and a heavy heart. And yet, over time, we somehow find a way to rebuild, to breathe, and to live again. Today, we're holding space for those stories that often go unheard, and those who had to say goodbye far too soon and not by choice. And joining me in this conversation is Sabrina Fletcher, who you may also know as the TFMR Doula. Thank you, Sabrina, for being here. I'm so honored that you are here today to hold space and, join in a powerful, what I think will be a powerful conversation for our communities.
Thank you so much, Dr. Loree, and thanks for that wonderful introduction on this topic. It's so true. There's so much silence. There's so much misunderstanding. There's so much stigma around whole baby loss in general. And then when it's this type of baby loss, it's because it's not talked about. There is more misunderstanding.
Exactly. And so I'm really looking forward to continuing to give language to this type of loss, to elevate or, really center what this experience is like. And to do that, I would love to hear a little bit about how you came to become the TFMR doula.
I went through this type of loss myself in
Mm-hmm.
2018. It was my second pregnancy, my first pregnancy, first baby. Everything was fine. All the tests were fine. Well, there were a few actually markers in that pregnancy, but then it eventually all resolved and she's fine. She's a 12-year-old kid now. And at that point, she was about 3 or 4 years old, and we wanted to have another baby. But when we got to the late first trimester scan, people usually do this scan. If they do it between 11 and 14 weeks, and it looks for different markers that can point
Mm-hmm.
to heart defects or other anomalies or genetic issues, and our baby was very sick. I could even see on the screen, and the doctor was pulling up images of what the ultrasound should look like and then showing us on the screen where things were going wrong for our baby. And I was so alone in that whole experience through making the decision, through researching what this even meant, through scheduling and having to do it in an abortion clinic, which I don't think is appropriate both
Right.
for TFMR families nor for people who are going through an abortion for lifestyle reasons. I just don't think it's
Right.
appropriate for either. It's just a different psychological experience.
Totally.
And so going through that so lonely, I wanted to be a companion. I wanted to be somebody who would sit with these families in their darkest hour and remind them, yes, you're a good parent. Yes, you made a hard decision. Yes, you made this decision, for your own body, for your baby, for your family, for your futures, and you
Yeah.
deserve grief support. It's what I didn't
Right.
have through the process. And that's what I want to give people. I want them to know, yes, this is a deep grief. Yes, this is most of the people in the community have a lot of trauma that they need to process through it. And how did we used to ancestrally process trauma was in community, through
Mm-hmm.
ritual, through being
Mm-hmm.
seen, through being held, through marking. Yes, this is a big effing deal. This is a
Right.
big deal. And your body just went through so much, and your mind and your spirit. So that's the space that I want to hold for
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And it sounds like, it's definitely informed by your own experience and knowing how isolating and traumatic that experience is. It's like you want to bring that knowledge and really support people and having maybe like what you didn't have. And I'm curious if you feel comfortable, I would love to hear a little bit about, maybe the decision-making process or, the series of events or the moment that led you to actually, making the decision to terminate your pregnancy.
Yeah, it definitely happened in layers, which I think is for, the name of your podcast, the layers that we live in, the layers that we move in, the layers that we're seeing through, that we're feeling our
Mm-hmm.
way through. Because I remember being on the examination table and, the ultrasound one, it was either vaginally or really pushing really hard on my belly. And then the doctor explaining what he was seeing. And I remember having this thought, I'm going to have an abortion. And that it just kind of exploded my mind because
Mm-hmm.
I was
Mm-hmm.
thinking, no, but this is a wanted baby. We planned for this child. We're coming to this ultrasound because this is prenatal care. This is prenatal care appointment. And I didn't understand at that point that sometimes abortion or termination for medical reasons is part of prenatal care. That's the part of the story that we don't talk about. So that was one moment where it was just like an intuitive hit, like I just knew. And then, he explained that he was seeing that the baby had high drops, had no nasal bone, had cystic hygroma. And so with those data points, then I went home and looking at all the research papers I could get my hands on that weren't behind a paywall, and looking at all of the percentages and all of the potential bad or good or could resolve on its own outcomes
Mm-hmm.
and the comorbidities and learning all of these terms that I didn't know. Cystic hydrops,
Like,
genetic
what is that?
T18, he was saying maybe it was Turner's syndrome. I didn't know any of those things. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know what any
Mm-hmm.
of those words were before going into that appointment. And then all of a sudden I'm dropped into this space where I'm supposed to be an expert on these conditions and make an educated and informed decision, but with no medical background. And
Right.
really, I know some people in the community are able to meet with a genetic counselor. That doctor is
Mm-hmm.
actually a maternal fetal medicine specialist. So we did get some information there from him, but not really around the emotional impact of making this decision.
Right.
But through all of that research and everything, I eventually felt in my heart and also in my head, it was logical and also an emotional decision that this would be the ethical choice for us, for this baby, in this pregnancy, in our family, in my body, in this
Mm-hmm.
moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I really appreciate you sharing the different layers to the decision-making process. There's this medical process, where you're trying to comprehend a lot of these medical terms. And listening to your story, it sounds so familiar to my own when I went for my first trimester screening, really late in my first trimester that pushed us into my second trimester. And then there's suddenly this time crunch to synthesize all of this information, all these possibilities. And to make a decision. And some people have access to a genetic counselor, some people don't. And even still, aside from the medical piece of things, there's not a lot of support, or wasn't a lot of support for the emotional impact of that. So, you're having to really take that into account. And in addition to, thinking about like what's going to be the ethical decision. And I appreciate you using that, or framing it that way, ethical decision for your child and for your family and your body as well, because having this conversation can be very sensitive, especially in the political climate that we're in. Reproductive rights are being rolled back every day, and there's some pretty strong opinions about abortion. Also, you said something that also resonated with me when you mentioned, having to have your procedure at an abortion clinic, and the psychological difference in kind of approaching, abortion through maybe unwanted pregnancies versus, abortion through, or an ending of a pregnancy through a wanted pregnancy, and just how that is, you know, different in some ways. There's some nuances there that I think, people don't understand. And so even when you're thinking about that time in your doctor's office and like, oh, I'm going to have an abortion, it's like, it's kind of wild to think about that being part of prenatal care,
Mm,
because the language that we have for abortion and the narrative around it, it means this is an unwanted pregnancy. And that's not the case for, you know, for us in this community. So
mm,
I appreciate you really framing that. And also, I think touching on what you might have needed most in that moment, and what was missing, and that like level of support and layers of support at every point of decision making, or even taking in the information. Because it seems like as you were being flooded with all of these medical terms, it's like you have to really sit with, what does this really mean? And can I handle it? And if we do, what does that mean, or not? There's so many different scenarios that you're having to field.
mm.
Um, And I'm curious, just based on what you described and what your experience was, what were some of the hardest parts of your decision-making process?
Um, the political climate around it.
Hmm.
So at that point in time, and I don't know the ins and outs of TFMR specifically in the state that I live in right now. Recently, abortion was decriminalized in Mexico where I live,
Hmm.
and that's
Okay.
where this happened.
Okay.
But even still in our state, you have to like hit these certain criteria. Like you can only get
Hmm.
an abortion if it was rape or something. Like it's pretty crazy. And our doctor said, because I asked, well, if I decide to have the procedure, could I have it here in this state? And he said, yes, but you would have to bring your case to the ethics committee of
Wow.
a
Wow.
local hospital, and that was just an immediate no in my whole entire body. Just no, I'm
Hmm.
not going to leave my baby's destiny up to some random, probably old white male doctors
Right. Right.
because they're not me. They're not holding my hand. They're not taking us and paying for all of the therapy and this and that, or an extended NICU stay, or they don't care.
Exactly. And it's just so wild to see people who are not involved in your family and your care making decisions about what should happen to you and your body. And to not be able to make that decision solely with your partner and
Mm,
your doctor, and with your doctor really just providing the medical piece of things, or maybe also a therapist or a doula to really help process the emotional parts of things, so that you can come to a conclusion that feels right ethically. And
mm.
so it sounds like you had to do a lot of work on your own in order to do that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
very lonely, and then there was still even a time crunch because I didn't wanna go through the ethics committee. He said, "Well, the state over," which happens to be Mexico City State, it's like the
Hmm.
capital area,
Hmm.
"There you can, but only up to 14, 12 weeks. So you have 6 days
Wow.
to decide." And that time crunch then made it so I mean, I could have gotten blood drawn maybe to get an NIPT testing if I would have wanted an amniocentesis, or CVS, like, is that what it is? Or, yeah, I think so, where they test the
I
placenta cells, I would have had to wait beyond even the state overs limit. And so I still would have had to go through an ethics committee in that state, or I don't know. It's just all that complicated the decision because the decision
yeah.
then was rushed. And I kept thinking, like, how is this pro life?
R
Nobody is caring about my baby's life right now. Nobody caring about my baby's full diagnosis, fully formed, fully informed, needing to
Right.
wait to get an amniocentesis and seeing all of the details. Nobody's caring.
Right.
Those
No.
people who made these rules and made these laws in this way, who say that they're pro life, are caring about either of us, our whole family, my already existing living daughter.
No. No. Nobody's really taking that into account, and you're right, like, how is it kind of pro-life? And I can appreciate just one of the hardest decisions about or hardest parts of the decision-making process, being the political climate.
Hmm.
And I think we're gonna talk a little bit more about that later, but I do believe that also impacts how people talk about it and talk about the loss or the freedom to even name what they're going through because of the stigma that's attached to this type of loss.
Yeah,
But
exactly. And
mhm,
I just want to say I do free decision support calls now. So
mhm,
I fill that gap.
I love that. I love
But
that.
there's still, like, I'm thinking about, wouldn't it be nice if I could have like a Google ad to that, or ad, but how would I say, would I be able to say termination? Would I be able to abortion? Would I be able to say the words that I need to say so that the people seeing it would know this is for me?
Right. Exactly.
There's still, like,
Exactly.
there's still silencing. There's still silencing even on the support side, like me as a support person now. It is
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yes. No, and I appreciate you naming it, how it's still happening, because if we don't name it, we don't know how to continue to work against it, or changing and shifting that narrative, which I think makes these continued conversations that we're having that much more powerful. And, you know, and continuing on in this conversation and thinking about just all of the different layers of this experience, I want to also start to touch on grief because, what you have the medical decision and the experience of just the trauma associated with getting the diagnosis, going through the decision making process, and and then having the procedure. And then I think for a lot of us, that's when we're really thrust into this grieving process now that all of the other stuff has passed, so to speak. And I'm curious if you could speak to how did grief start to show up for you, just in general, and in your body and your life and your relationships.
I mean, there was definitely the whole crisis response, trauma response. Now I have that language.
Mhm.
I didn't have that language at that time. It felt like, time had sped up, but it was also going like molasses slow. And um I w- I would like get into these like hyper fixation on the numbers and the percentages, and like researching. This is even after I went through the procedure. And like,
Mm.
why and why and why, and just like the body feeling so tight and my not being able to work right.
Yeah.
It's hard to put it
Yes.
into words. I would
Mhm.
have conversations with people, but I wasn't there. I was like in the procedure room. I was like sitting in the recliner after face, but I was like seeing past them. And I was still,
Ex
that's the trauma, but it's also the grief. So
exactly.
there's no way to separate the two.
Mm-mm.
But what
Mm-mm.
did
Mm-mm.
start to help was I got trauma specific therapy
Mhm.
using EMDR. And I know that there are
Mhm.
a few different like body trauma, like somatic, or there's also
Yes.
havening, or some other things, or brain spotting, or whatever, all those different types of actually looking at the body and where the body is like storing these traumatic events instead of actually having it in the memory place,
Right.
instead of like it's
Right.
right here right now, like you're still going through danger, danger, danger.
Yes.
That was a big part of my grief process, was just like
Hmm.
feeling like I was in danger. My whole family
Yeah.
was in danger. My body was in danger. Like, it's dangerous to be a woman, dangerous to be a
Yeah.
person with a womb. It's dangerous to live in this world where nobody gives a crap about you if your pregnancy is not going perfectly well and not sick.
Right. Right. No, and I just listening to you share a little bit about the trauma, the disconnection, and just totally it mirrors like my experience as well. Feeling like you're there but you're not there, and in some ways, it's such an out of body experience that comes from just the natural order of things, just not just life unfolding in a way that you never imagined. It's like it's not supposed to be this way.
Mm.
And you're not supposed to have to make these kinds of decisions or go through something like this. And then also to go through something like this under these huge, like these really intense political actions that are dictating what we should or shouldn't do and directing the type of care that you should get. So there's so much complexity in this and this loss and how it shows up. And so I'm glad to hear that EMDR was really helpful in helping you reprocess some of those traumas, because we know it does live in the body, and still, yeah, there's a lot that's happening.
Mm. Yeah, and
Yeah.
something that my therapist said that really helped me. She said, "We're going to do this EMDR and it's going to help you with these trauma symptoms or these
Mhm.
responses so that the grief can unfold naturally and organically."
That is beautiful.
Because the
Yes.
way, like, your grief is not a problem. We can help soothe this trauma. And
Yes.
that was so validating, because I'm like, yeah, and that's even like another layer of grief, another layer of trauma, is that I'm having to deal with all of this political crap and the
Mhm.
stigmatize instead of like, well, who's gonna like come and sit beside me and like say my baby's name with me? Why didn't the nurse hold my hand and say, "I'm so sorry for your loss"?
Yes. And thinking about that, you just reminded me of my experience in going in for my termination. And one of the things that I still held on to this day, even though I know there are so many issues that I have with how the medical system handles that, my doctor was just such a beautiful person throughout all of this. And I
Mm,
remember going in, asking her for footprints,
mm,
and just, was talking me through what was going to happen. She was holding my hand. And then after I came out of recovery, she just sat with me for a little bit and held my hand, and we looked at my footprints of my son.
mm.
And even having that is such a powerful and healing moment, thinking about what we might need or what could be really helpful in those moments, which but also makes me wonder, what do you think you might have needed more of, that you didn't get from your medical team?
Yeah, exactly those things. And I say just, but it's everything.
Yeah.
Someone saying, "I'm sorry for your loss."
Yes. Exactly.
Seeing that I was a grieving mother.
Yes.
Seeing
Exactly.
that this is a baby we wanted to bring into our family, but the circumstances are not aligning.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Really being seen. And where did you eventually find support? I mean, I know that you did the trauma therapy with your therapist, and that seems like that was a very validating experience. And I just love what she said about working on the trauma so that you could allow the grief to unfold naturally, because grief is a normal response to this kind of loss. And I'm curious, where else did you find community or support?
I also found a postpartum doula, so I would meet with her. She did a postpartum massage and a ritual bath. And here in Mexico, they do, I guess we could interpret it or translate it as a closing of the bones ceremony. So that was so helpful because I was seen as being postpartum. That is something
Yes.
that is missing, I think, with a lot of even people who need a DNC for regular, whatever regular, like there's no regular. It's all
Right.
awful and it's all horrible. But, that the baby has passed naturally, miscarriage, or
Mhm.
even an early miscarriage, or that awful term that people use, chemical pregnancy, you're
Yes.
still postpartum after that. I was
Yes.
having hot flashes and my hormones were all over the place and
Mhm.
everything felt super intense because I was postpartum and
Yeah.
then I had no baby. So I was grieving on top of being postpartum, and there's already grief in postpartum because you're
Right.
releasing one past life and moving into another.
Right.
And
Yes.
none of that is really seen very well in society, especially Western capitalistic society. It's like, just get back to work and,
Right.
you want to
Right.
sit and like have some tea about this? No, you need to go and do some emails. And it's like,
Yeah.
I can't do my emails until I do the grief.
Exactly.
And through all of this, the big holding was through the TFMR community. So
Mhm.
at that point, I think now most people go to Reddit. There's a TFMR underscore support Reddit
Oh, good.
forum. But at that time, and I think that this forum also exists on Baby Center, it's a Termination for Medical Reasons
Mhm.
forum.
Mhm.
And then they
Mhm.
recommended other private Facebook groups, and I joined Ending a Wanted Pregnancy. So
Oh,
those people
good.
there in those groups who would post about, I lit a candle for my baby today, or even just
Yes.
saying my baby, or I joined this K pregnancy loss walk. And I just remember reading things like that and being like, I can do that. I can call
Mhm.
this a baby. I can call
Mhm.
this a pregnancy loss.
Right.
A part of the entire baby loss community because I am.
Yes. 'Cause you are. Exactly. Exactly. And finding community is so important, and I'm glad to hear that, there are more resources out there and they're a little bit more visible, because I know I had mine 10 years, going on 11 years ago.
Mm,
And I remember just searching the underbelly of Facebook to find this. And there's a secret group that you
mm,
had to be invited to because it wasn't safe to really advertise,
yeah.
that it was a TFMR group. And I think at that point, the only other resource that I knew about was the website A Heartbreaking Choice.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I'm glad to hear that, the resources are improving, and but also the power and having those resources and how that helps you, really frame your grief
Mm-hmm.
and to honor, that this is your baby, and trying to figure out ways to ritualize that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad that you were able to experience that. And it also brings up another question for me about just how you started to talk about your loss. And especially as we start to think about this stigma that goes along with this particular type of loss, because I'm curious, how did others outside the TFMR community respond to, when they learned about your loss or the type of loss that you had?
Outside the community, I mean, there were some kind of general pregnancy loss spaces and groups, and some people who had podcasts who, started to follow me on Instagram and listen to my stories. But it was still very rare, still very
Mhm.
far and few between.
Mm,
I would really
mhm.
cultivate those relationships because it would remind me,
Yeah.
most people do want to include us. It's just
Mhm.
that this loss isn't talked about. Maybe they didn't have the language before. Even at that point, TFMR was still an emerging term. Not everybody
Mhm.
was using it. We had all of these very divergent, like tons of different ways to talk about it. And I
Yes.
think that that was making it hard for us to come together kind of as a coalition, and even hard for
Mhm.
the pregnancy loss and baby loss and infant loss community in general to include us
Mhm.
because, if we don't even know how to talk about it, if we don't even know how to name it, how will they?
Right.
So I see that that was a part of what was happening because
Mhm.
the angry anti-choice voices, it's a very small minority, but they're very loud, they're very angry, They've grabbed
Yes.
up all of the Google terms and, their fake clinics come up first on searches and all that jazz. All that
Yes.
is happening, but the real souls, like the real people in pregnancy loss and baby loss communities do mostly want to include us. They're just actually kind of waiting for us to show them how. And
Mhm.
so now
Mhm.
that we and some other people who are starting to specialize in TFMR or have that as one of their specialties and post about it and have that on their
Yes.
website, all of that is helping a lot, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree that there's been a shift, and but also I think the piece around anti-choice, or anti-abortion voices can be incredibly loud. And I remember in that secret Facebook group that there were some women that were in that group from very conservative religious communities
Mm.
that didn't feel comfortable talking about it. And I remember one of them identified as Catholic, and so we know that there's a definite kind of thought about how to handle abortion in the Catholic Church. And so it just made me really think about the stigma and how our language contributes to perpetuating the stigma, and how we're trying to break that and to center our experiences, to normalize this loss and to normalize the experience so that
Mm.
people can grieve.
Yeah, that's the
So,
point. So
mhm,
we can get to the grief.
so we can get to the grief.
So we can get
Exactly.
there. So we can feel it. So we can feel the remembrance and the love and the honoring and, bringing our babies along with us in
Yes,
our lives. For me,
exactly.
that's been the
Exactly.
healing, and that's how I help guide people in my community. It's like, yes, they're loud and they're angry over there, and a lot of other people are uninformed, and we aren't. We are very
Right.
informed. We've gone through it. And so, how will we go through it? Let's go through it
Right.
together.
Yes, let's go through it together. And what would you say to someone who might be struggling with that stigma, or in some ways believing that this loss is different or less valid because they're actively having to make this choice, and there's some moral issue that they're struggling with, emotionally?
Yeah, I would say that that is the double loss of TFMR. That
Mhm.
is it. That is
Mhm.
it right there in a nutshell. It is, yes, we lose our baby, but we're also losing our whole entire worldview and what we thought we would do in these hypothetical
Mhm.
situations. Or if this happens, I hear this a lot, even from people who, before they go through TFMR, they call themselves pro-choice, and they go through this and they're
Mhm.
like, but this is different. And it's okay that
Yes.
it feels different, this is a
Mhm.
different type it is a different type of loss, but it's not a different loss, right? There's that nuance
Right.
there that I'm
Right.
sure you understand, it's like,
Yes.
um, each type of baby loss may need its own special community. Like, if you've
Mhm.
gone through ectopic, you've been through traumatic procedures, you may have lost
Yes.
parts of your reproductive organs, that's a
Right.
huge loss,
Huge,
and
for sure.
it's just not the same as someone who has an early miscarriage or early abortion at 5 weeks, and they go on and have another baby within a year. It's
Right.
just not the same.
Exactly. It's not the same.
So it's okay that it's not the same,
Mhm.
and we also need that space for the second part of the loss, for the double loss,
Right.
for
Exactly.
the reordering of our own reckoning with our religion or our spirituality or our God or our philosophy or like,
Mm.
it's huge. These
It
are
is huge.
huge questions, and we were
Yes.
never meant to ask them in a vacuum. We were never
Right.
meant to work through this all alone, which is why we
Right.
really need community through this. It's why, like, all my support spaces, that it's all around. It's either one-on-one with me, like I'll be your community and I'll be your gateway into the TFMR community, or you come into our group, so you do a grief circle with us, or you're in our free Facebook group space, and that's another circle. Or I'm gonna open up another circle for us where you can meet with us monthly. called the TFMR support sanctuary. We need these sanctuaries. We need these circles. We need these
Yes,
spaces. And it's okay if
exactly.
you're questioning everything. That's the second part of this
Exactly.
loss. That
Mhm.
that is it. And so if you're in that questioning space, there are others who have been there too, and
Yeah.
there are others who have like walked through and got to the light at the end of the tunnel while
Yeah.
bringing their baby's energy and love and memory with them.
Mhm. Mm, mhm. So it sounds like you're really helping people, by creating that space, it's like you're allowing them to grieve and also nurture the connection and move through a lot of the nuances where you question or, reflect and maybe be angry, go through all of these emotions. But it's like honoring the full process and being able to honor the double loss that gets filtered through all of these layers of our identity.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious when you think about your experiences and how you moved through healing and getting to the other side of this grieving process, what do you think helped you begin to move through the darkness? And what were the moments where you felt like were turning points?
Definitely the validation and the permission from the community and seeing
Hmm.
other people doing it.
Yes.
They're the examples.
Hmm.
If others have done it, I can do it too.
Hmm.
And then
Hmm.
also taking on sort of two-pronged, right? But I had to do a lot of work in the community, with a doula, with a therapist, connecting with other TFMR parents, hearing their stories. And then I also had to, not in isolation, but the
Hmm.
private processing, the things that
Yeah.
I needed to do myself, which for me it looked like art and journaling, sometimes just sitting in the grass,
Hmm.
crying a lot, having all of those moments.
Yeah. 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 Just having all of those powerful and messy
Yeah.
moments.
Yeah.
Yeah. What you said, that validation from the community, and I keep thinking about people who've walked with the stigma or the shame of TFMR and being parts of communities where they don't feel free to really talk about that and how that can complicate the grieving process. And
Oh,
what you just said, and I was jotting this down about how powerful validation from the community is. And I think about the people that I've encountered who have not felt really free to talk about their loss or the type of loss that they've had because they live in communities where termination or abortion is really frowned upon and how that can complicate the grieving process. So having the language and having the freedom to name what's happening, to name what's happened, and that being an integral part of being able to move through grief. So I was just reflecting on that and loving how that's what you try to kind of cultivate for others, and that's also what to you through your own journey.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I couldn't do it alone. And I don't other people to do it alone either. That loneliness and that isolation, it can be a killer. And hyperbole, like that is where we fall into postpartum depression and people even end their own lives.
Right,
It's
right.
that's not what I want for people. I want them to know that they're not the only one,
Mhm,
and they're not the only one in their Catholic community who's been through. They're not the only one in their, conservative town who's been others right there, like your neighbors.
mhm,
They're
mhm.
they're right there with you and they're feeling just as silenced, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it sounds like the message that you really want to make sure that people who may be in the early stages of their journey really know is they're not alone in this. And in some ways, seeing people like you or me or other people in the community talk about their losses can be that touchstone of what it looks like to move through it and to start to live again.
Mhm.
And so I'm also curious, what does living again and really embracing life after TFMR look for you right now?
What it looks like for me, it's it's funny, not funny, haha, but like interesting because the annual conference that I run is Survive and Thrive After TFMR, right? So we're trying to get to this place where we're listening to others who have found their way of thriving and living even through these horrors, even through this trauma. It's still a big part of my thriving. I have to be in community with people who are
Yeah.
doing it too. I have to. That's what the thriving looks like to me, is that if I'm isolating, if I'm hiding, if I'm hiding it away, if I'm silencing myself, I start to feel more ill. And
Hmm.
so um I continue to create and to seek out these safe places where I can express myself.
Hmm.
Um It looks like, I mean, on a day-to-day micro level, it looks like lighting a candle for her. It looks
Hmm.
like wearing a ring with all of my baby's birthstones. And it's, and hers is the same size as the others. It's
Yes.
it's uh It's listening to her love and messages and allowing them to live through me. I
Hmm.
never thought that parenting would look like this, and yet this is how I was called. I was called, unfortunately, to go through it this way.
Yeah.
But there's so much about parenting, right? Like, we're going to be
Right.
judged about every single one of our parenting decisions. So
Right.
it's almost like a crucible moment, like, well, welcome to parenting. And especially
Yeah.
moms, like, well, welcome to being a mom. Here's all the mom guilt and the mom shaming and the mommy wars and,
Yes.
everybody saying you need to do such and such to be a good
Yeah.
mom. No, I need to be me to be a good mom.
Right.
I need to listen to my kids, my specific children, and my babies, my pregnancy. I need to listen to my body.
Right. And that's what it looks like to integrate, that loss with where you are right now. I mean,
Mm,
just like you said, having, birthstone rings with, all of your kids' birthstones. And I'm wearing, mine right now, and, just finding
right.
ways to, to honor your child and to stay connected, and, and to have that be part of your family story.
Hmm.
And I love what you're putting out in the world to support the community, with this annual summit. And would you like to say a little bit more about that, and also maybe where people can find you?
Yeah. So I usually have all of my links on my homepage, the
Hmm.
TFMRdoula.com. Once the conference, what are we calling it? Registration. Once the conference registration is up and live, it'll be on my homepage. A lot of people like to follow me on Instagram. It's the same, the TFMR Doula. So you can find me there as well. That's a good hub to see, what's on the horizon, what's open right now, what's the next workshop coming up, what's the next talk, what's the next healing circle that I could join. All of those are really good places. And I have a podcast as well, our TFMR
Yes.
stories, because if you're anything like me, you probably want to hear all the stories and then some of other people who
Yes.
have been through it and got through it, and how are they doing that. That's a
Yes.
big question, I think, for us, or if you've gone through this. How
Yeah.
how have others survived this?
Yes. Yes. How have others survived, and being that touchstone to hold space for others coming along. And so I really want to thank you for being here today, Sabrina, and sharing your wisdom and your experience and your passion for this community. It is truly a gift. And speaking of community, I know that I have really enjoyed being in community with you
Mm,
online, and also just being in these spaces and having these opportunities to support those who are coming along.
yeah.
So I want to thank you for that. And
Yeah.
thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Yeah, it really does heal our souls as well. It's a group project.
It is.
A group project.
It is a group project. It is a group project. And on that note, I hope that those of you who are listening, can appreciate how TFMR, it's not just a medical term, it's really a lived experience. And I hope that the conversation that you witnessed today can be part of your healing journey. And hopefully you will know that there is space for you and your story, and that there is a community here to support you. And if this episode speaks to you, and whether you have lived through this loss or supporting somebody who is or who has, if you're just beginning to learn, I want to thank you for listening. Grief doesn't follow a timeline, and healing isn't about erasing the pain, but it's learning to live with it, and sometimes even alongside it. And to those who've survived the unthinkable, you're not alone, you're not broken, and your story deserves to be heard. Thank you for joining me on The Layers We Live. And if you know someone who needs to hear this conversation, please share it with them. And if you'd like to continue walking through these layered stories with us, subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, please take good care of yourself, and remember, you're not alone in the layers that you carry.